Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Gleand Podcast, fastest hour of the week. And we trust you've had a good week so far, and we appreciate you tuning in. I know everybody's got a busy schedule, but we appreciate, again, you taking time out of your schedule to tune in as we look at the Word of God. We look at political issues going on in the world, educational issues, health concerns, and we relate these things to the Word of God. And, you know, as we believe, there's nothing that we face that the Word of God does not have an answer to. The Bible is a living Word, and it's still relevant today just as much as it was the day that it was penned. So we're going to be looking tonight where I'm excited. I always enjoy getting to discuss with our friend Jason Phibbs. He's just top notch. I just can't say enough about him. He does his research, his due diligence in topics. And tonight we'll be talking about a health crisis and death that we've been seeing lately. And Jason had just recently done a video on this on his Rumble, and I watched it, and it's really concerning and alarming. And I wanted to have him on our show. And as many of you know, some of our abbreviations and codes for certain words. But, with that being said, I do want to read that, this content that we're presenting in this video, it's intended for informational purposes. It's not a substitute for professional or medical help and treatment if it need be. But we do want to get some things out there, some stats, some statistics that we believe are very alarming and concerning. So without further ado, I'm going to be quiet, but I'm going to open this up to Jason, and I do appreciate the work you do on the political and the health education. You do a great job, and I believe that this is something God's called you to in these last days to help educate people. I think a lot of times with Christians, we don't want to look at reality. We just want to look at the Word. But when you look at the reality, you can parallel it with the Word, but we still have to know facts. We still have to know what's going on, not being blind about things that are going on around us, so that we do know properly how to stand on the Word. So without further ado, Jason, I'm going to let you just take off on it.
No, I appreciate that, Wes. Thanks so much for having me back. And, to the folks out there, just a little context. I went to the Stanley County Board of Health meeting a couple weeks ago and gave about a 30-minute edition of this presentation due to the time that they allowed me. And I appreciate that. They were very gracious in giving me the time and listened attentively, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with it. But as you mentioned, this is about, when we talk about living out our faith, one of the things that we value as Christians is life and truth.
Yeah.
And this is just an example of putting that into action, is really all it is. So, as you said, there's a health crisis going on, not only within our community, but within the state of North Carolina, the country, even the world. And no one's talking about it.
Right.
If this was any normal time, this type of information would be all over the news. We'd be having regular conversations about it. We're just not. And so, I feel compelled, by the Spirit to bring this information forward and really my goal here is to try to tell this story in a way that is consumable. It kind of puts a lot of the pieces together for people, and hopefully empowers them to, do their own research and kind of take it from here and keep up, with sort of where things are. So I titled this "Something is Wrong." And if you go to the first slide here, we'll just kind of start walking through it. And when I say something's wrong, what I mean is the first thing I did was I got some information from Stanley County EMS. And so with it, Stanley County EMS provided me a couple data points. One was the number of calls that they're getting in to their center. And so if you look at that on a yearly basis, what you'll see here, for those who can see the slides, is that you'll notice that it's been trending up basically for the last 8 years or so. This is the data that was provided. it kind of flattened out there from 2019 to 21, and then now here in 22 and 23, it's jumped up significantly. 8% increase in 22, 11% increase in 23. And this is information that actually a friend of mine brought to my attention because they had heard a presentation from one of the EMS folks. So, and just in case people are wondering, they might be thinking, oh, well, Stanley County's growing, and so that's just natural. We're going to have... Well, Stanley County grew in 2022 at a rate of 2%, but we had an 8% increase in calls, right? So there's something disproportional there.
Yeah.
If you go to the next slide, you'll see this is looking at EMS primary impression. So when they respond to a call, they make an assessment as to what's going on with the patient at that time. And they have over 200 different categories that they put this information in. So this is just a few that I pulled out that were probably pretty disturbing. But they changed their reporting system towards the end of 2019. So I really only have 2020 data forward is all I got. But what I did was I took 2020 and then I compared it to the subsequent years. So what you're seeing here, just to give you an example, is cardiac rhythm disturbance in the top left corner there. What that means is that in 2021, we had 17% more occurrences than we had in 2020.
Right.
In 2022, we had 71% more.
Right.
And then in 23, 62%. And you can see that across the board. Well, look at something like seizures.
Yeah.
I mean, 600% increase over 2020.
Right.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
No one's talking about that. I mean, you know, so there's things like that. Stroke is up, cardiac rhythm disturbance is up, vaginal hemorrhaging is up. I mean, these are disturbing things.
Yeah.
And these are just data points that we can look at. Well, then you take it the next step, and now we look at deaths. So first we're just talking about the hurt that goes on in the community. Now we're looking at deaths. Well, you can go onto the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services website. You can get death data for Stanley County, and this is Stanley County residents. So it doesn't matter where they died. It's the fact that they were residents of Stanley County. So they could have died in Concord or whatever. But the data goes back to 2015. So what I wanted to do was measure excess deaths. And the way you do that is you establish a baseline. So in other words, what is the normal number of deaths that we experience in a year? Well, if you look at 2015 to 2019, what you would see is that it's a pretty flat line. So it's pretty consistent. I think we average somewhere around 720 deaths per year. Well, starting in 2020, you can see when we compare the subsequent years to that baseline, we see a big spike start happening. Big jump in 2020, even bigger jump in 21, and then sort of tailing off here. But even as recent as 2023, still almost a 10% increase. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that exact same trend shows up for the state of North Carolina.
Wow.
So whatever's happening isn't just here locally, right? It's going on statewide.
Right.
And there's plenty of other data out there that would suggest that this trend is not just in the state, but even more broader than that. So that kind of brings me to the question of why. Right? Why is all this happening? And I would say, and what I would like people to consider is, what if it's the jab? And I say it that way because I realize that people, there's people on both sides of this. And even in our own county, half the people got the full double 2 doses, and the rest didn't. So I realize that if you were someone who took it, maybe you're still taking it, right? This could be extremely disturbing to you, and I understand that. And so this isn't the point of this is not to point the finger, to make fun of people. It's to help people.
Exactly.
It's to give you the information so that you can at least make a more informed decision. And I'm going to make the argument that the decision that you made beforehand was not informed, and that's one of the big problems here. So if we kind of dive in to what's some of the evidence to suggest that the jab could be the primary cause for some of this going on? Well, if we look at the VAERS database, so for those who don't know about VAERS, it stands for Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. This is the system that the CDC and FDA set up back in 1990 as part of one of the basically the bills that gave them pharmaceutical companies immunity on vaccines. This is something that was set up in order to record all the adverse events. So anytime someone had a bad event from a shot or vaccine, they could report that to VAERS. Their doctor anybody can report. And so that's been going on since 1990. Well, if you look at the chart, you can see that up until 2020, the number of deaths that were, and of course there's all kinds of events reported, but the number of deaths that were reported didn't even get out of the hundreds. I mean, it's hard to tell on that chart, but you can tell it's small.
Yeah, very small.
And then all of a sudden in 2021, what in the world?
Right.
You know, it jumps off the page. And then similar to the graph that we had looked at before with excess deaths, as the number of jabs tails off, so does the number of deaths that we saw before.
Right.
Now, people will look at something like this and they'll say, well, but, you know, we gave the thing to a billion people. You know, what do you expect? You're going to have, you know, if you try to vaccine the whole world at one time, that's what you're going to see. Well, the scientific community and people that do this type of work for a living, they have measures that they can look at to indicate safety signals. And one of those measures is called the proportional reporting ratio. And the proportional reporting ratio is basically looking at how often does this particular adverse event, in this case death, how often does that occur for a given product, the jab, versus how often does that occur for all the products in that category, so all the vaccines. And when you compare those two things together, if you get a ratio greater than 1, then that means it's occurring more in that one product than it is for all the products.
Right.
So anything greater than 1 is considered a safety signal. Well, according to Dr. Jessica Rose, so U.S. Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, he held a hearing on this topic. And Dr. Jessica Rose, who has a bachelor's in applied mathematics, a master's in medical immunology, PhD in computational biology, postdocs in molecular biology and biochemistry, said, quote, the PRR, the proportional reporting ratio for death in the context of the jab using current VAERS data is 3.6. Now, that means that the occurrence of the adverse event of death occurs over 3 times more likely in this particular jab product than it does in all the other products.
And all the other.
So that is a flashing red safety signal.
Right.
Now, it doesn't necessarily mean causation, but it does mean there's a very strong correlation, and there's definitely something that needs to be looked into. Well, for comparison purposes, how has the CDC and FDA responded to incidents like this in the past? Well, if we go back to July of '99, the CDC recommended that parents and healthcare providers postpone the use of the rotavirus vaccine after just 15 cases of what is called intussusception, or a folding over of the bowel. Now, they had 15 cases of that occurring in infants in 6 months, and the CDC said, you need to stop doing that. Now, even after thousands of reported deaths of the jab, nobody sees a safety problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that just doesn't make any sense. So when people look at this and they say, well, it must not be enough for them to, it must not be enough to outweigh the benefits that we're getting. Well, that's not what history shows us. They have been much more sensitive. In fact, I gave an example the other day to somebody where I was on Anthony's show, and I was talking about the FDA and how just recently in the news I saw where the FDA had recalled some eye drops. And when you read their recall notice, it said that the number of adverse event reports that they had received for those eye drops, now they recalled it off the market. They have received 0 reports. So not one person has contacted FDA and said, man, this thing is blinding me, this thing's hurt my eyes. And yet we've got tens of thousands of people who are saying, my loved one or my patient died from this, and nobody's got a problem. Well, we take it one step further, and there actually is a standard for causation. It's called the Bradford-Hill criteria. This is something else Dr. Rose talked about. The Bradford-Hill criteria is a group of principles that can be useful in establishing epidemiologic evidence of a causal relationship between a presumed cause and an observed effect. And at that hearing, Dr. Rose testified that all of the jab deaths met, or the jab met all 10 of the Bradford-Hill criteria. In other words, she's saying not only is there an extremely strong correlation, but there's also sufficient information or sufficient proof for causation as well. So from her testimony alone, just the VAERS data by itself is enough evidence to say this ought to be yanked off the market. But that's not all. So we go to the next step, and if we take it a step further, so VAERS reports vaccines, or reports on all vaccines. For the jab specifically, the CDC created something called vSafe. And vSafe was a smartphone-based program to collect injuries, health information. And it was voluntary, so anybody could do it who wanted to, who had taken the shot. Well, over 10 million people responded that they wanted to participate, which is a huge number of people, right? So approximately 10 million people signed up. You see that in the top right corner. Total individual users, 10 million. Of those 10 million people, over 30% reported health impacts. That's that 3 million number.
Right.
3 million people said something health-wise was negative about this experience. And when you break that down, you can see in that bar chart there in the middle, 1.2 million of those were unable to perform normal activities. 1.3 million missed work or school. And 0.8 million or 800,000 required medical care.
Wow.
Now, 800,000, that's almost 8% of the 10 million people that responded to this had to get medical care after getting it.
Yeah.
Now, how many people, had they known up front, if you'd gone to your doctor or your pharmacist or whatever, and you say, hey, I'm here to get the shot, and if they said, now, let me just tell you, do you realize that you have a less than 1% chance of dying from this, but you got an 8% chance of needing medical care after I give it to you?
Yeah. Yeah.
How many people are signing up for that?
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
But see, that goes to the informed consent. Now, you might be saying, well, I've never heard of V-Safe. Why haven't I seen this data? Well, the Informed Consent Action Network that got this data, their legal team, nonprofit legal group, they had to sue the CDC twice to get this information. Now, this is public record.
Right.
And yet they had to sue to get it. So the question becomes, and you'll see this theme as we go through this, what are you trying to hide?
Yeah.
If there's nothing wrong, if this is perfectly safe, then what are we trying to hide? So that takes us to the next steps. We've seen an increase in cancers.
Yeah.
There's some data that was put together by an anonymous researcher named Ethical Skeptic is what he calls himself. He's on Twitter. He's got his own website, ethicalskeptic.com.
Yeah.
If anybody's sitting there thinking to themselves, oh, the Ethical Skeptic, what's that, some guy in his basement? Go read his bio. Go see the information he puts out there. I've done analytics for a living in my job for the last 20-some years, and I look at the stuff he puts out there, and I mean, it's tough for me to understand it. I mean, this dude, I don't know who he is, but he's smart.
Yeah.
But anyway, he took data from the American Cancer Society, and what you'll see on this chart is he's reporting the number of new cases per year in the United States. So the blue bars are the number of new cases, and you can see that's in thousands. So basically, we're talking millions of cases. Now, before 2020 or leading up to the jab being introduced in 2021, cancer diagnoses were growing at a rate of 1%, each year. Now, you can see from 2020 to 2021, there's this massive jump, referred to there as a 2.5 sigma jump. What does that mean? Well, 2.5 sigma jump means that the jump is so dramatic that there's less than a 1% probability that this was due to chance. So in other words, something happened.
Something changed somewhat, yeah.
And so now, since 2021, we're now on a 2.7% growth trajectory. And so not only was there a large increase in the number of cases, but now we're on we're growing at a faster rate, which is extremely concerning. And now there's even more and more reporting coming out. There's a recent study out from Japan and many other peer-reviewed research papers that are starting to reflect a massive increase in cancer cases. Now, some people will look at that and they'll say, well, the reason why cancer cases are growing is because, people didn't get their cancer screenings, right? Because 2020, you could go to the doctor and do some of that regular stuff. Well, the problem with that is twofold. One is that during 2020, since then, the cases where they've been increasing have been in two interesting places. Number one, it's been increasing in younger people, which younger people don't get cancer screenings.
Right, yeah.
So they weren't missing them. And number two, it's increasing in rarer forms of cancer. So we're seeing increases in all the wrong places to indicate that it's not because people just didn't get their cancer screenings. And so all of these things together are troubling. And you can see if you take the increased number of cases that we're seeing starting in 2021 compared to the growth path we were on, that's where he's getting that additional 800,000 cases in the last 3 years.
Well, I've noticed in the last 2 years, and there was even a celebrity that died with cancer recently, and I couldn't remember his name. I tried looking it up before I come this evening, but a phrase you're hearing now that you used to didn't hear. You would hear doctors say if somebody was diagnosed with cancer, oh, well, this is a very fast growing. You would hear that, but not a lot. But now you're hearing a new term in the last 2 years called a rapid cancer.
Or turbo cancer.
Or turbo cancer, which, again, now that you're explaining it that way and you're looking at the 2.5 sigma jump, then now the 6% sigma jump, that's not by chance. What is causing this all of a sudden, this rapid turbo growth in cancers that were really treatable and very rare, to say the least?
Well, and the turbo cancer term refers to the quickness with which it, like, so for example, you'll hear stories of people where they had cancer, they went into remission, and then like everything's been good for a while, and then all of a sudden they just feel like something's not right. They go to the doctor and they're eat up with it.
Yeah.
And even the doctors are like, how did this even happen?
Yeah.
Those are the kind of stories you're hearing. But again, this is just another example where, if someone were to say, well, what about this and what about that? Yeah, there's lots of questions.
Yeah.
And because of the censorship, which you set off this program, right?
Yeah.
The censorship is keeping people from doing the research that needs to be done. And that's why there's so many more questions than answers right now. And until we stop, lying to ourselves and pretending that this isn't happening, the sooner we can get down to the truth and start saving people's lives.
Yeah. Well, and I've said this even from the pulpit, we're past the point now, and we have been for years, but now it's very, very imperative that people understand this. We're past the point now of trusting what our news media says, what a lot of the CDC, the FDA, we're past the point of, and in some cases, even our own doctors, we're past the point of just taking them at their word without doing our own due diligence and our own research to make sure this is right for me. Because even a lot of, when you never seen all of every commercial now just about is about some kind of medication. And it's always presented to make everything great. But the whole commercial, a 30-second clip, it's 5 seconds of what it will do for you and 25 seconds of adverse side effects that may happen, and it even so it could cause sudden death. But people are taking this stuff. Why? Because they're taking these pharmaceuticals, scientists and people in it, they're taking their word for it just because it's supposed to make it better. And we've got to start doing research and paying attention. Wait a minute, why all of a sudden is everybody got to have some kind of medication for something?
Well, and that brings up a good point too about the trust factor.
Yeah.
And that's where I understand where people who, like I said, if you're listening to this and you think there's no way this is causing this, our health officials would not lie to us, etc. I understand that.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to swallow, because to believe that they would lie to you means that everything is in question.
Everything.
And that makes people afraid.
Yeah,
and I
absolutely.
That. But the fact of the matter is that the Bible says the truth will set you free.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's what we're trying to do here, is to say, look, we can't fix the problem if we won't admit we got one. And so if we continue to pretend about things that are not true, then we're just hurting ourselves and hurting the people we love. So we have to face the facts. And I think ultimately, the first step is just, let's get the truth out there. Let's figure out what our problems are.
Yeah.
And then we need to move on to the next step is, now what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have to be this way.
Yeah.
That's
And even, Jesus even said, when his disciples asked, they said, Master, what will be the signs of your coming? The first thing he said before he went through wars and rumors of wars, the first thing Jesus said to his disciples is, see that no man deceive you. Most of us think, well, that's just talking about false doctrine and things in the church. But now that we all know that we're living in the end times, I think his statement there was so much broader. See that no man, he didn't say a priest or, he said no man deceive you. So that's where we need to make sure that we're not being deceived. And sometimes that's a hard pill to swallow.
That's right. Well, if we go to the next one here, we'll see there's an increase in disabilities. So this chart is extremely powerful. So what this is showing is that black line there is representing the percent of people in the civilian labor force that have a disability. So this is Bureau of Labor Statistics data. This data was put together by a group called Finance Technologies, which is made up of PhD level mathematicians and led by a former BlackRock hedge fund manager. So these guys know what they're doing. But they pulled this from, they pulled the civilian labor force disability data from Bureau of Labor Statistics, and they pulled the cumulative jab doses from CDC. So what they're showing here is that you can see the percent of the labor force with a disability was very stable from about 2010 all the way to 2020. And then boom, in 2021, you see just it takes off like a rocket ship.
Yeah.
And what's going right there with it? The percent of the percent of population with cumulative doses. So this is cumulative doses of the jab. So it's not just whether you took one, but it's all the ones that you took, right? The cumulative number of doses as a percent of the population. That's what it's measuring. And you can see those two lines are just right on top of each other. I mean, that's so powerful. Now, like we said before, correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation, but man, that's one heck of a safety signal.
Absolutely.
So that's one. If you go to the next page here, you'll see this is looking at a similar sort of view, except instead of looking at percentages, this is raw numbers. So on the left-hand side, you've got the increase in disabilities of the labor force in absolute numbers, not percent. Right. So you got increased numbers. And this is not the total number that are disabled. This is the increase per year in disabled. And you can see that increase is going right in line with the number of excess deaths. At the same time. So we're seeing excess deaths and disabilities all going together. So you've got cumulative doses of the jab going in line with the disabilities, and you got disabilities going in line with death, right? So all of this stuff is starting to line up together. So that's just some of the evidence. And again, everything I'm telling you here today, as much information as I've got here, I hadn't even hardly scratched the surface.
Right.
I mean, there's so much out there. So that's just some of the evidence to show about, that could lead to the premise that the jab is the cause for this hurt and death. So now we get to sort of a next section, which is, and my contention is that the jab the safety of it is questionable and unverified. Now, what's the evidence for that? So if someone says, well, okay, you got a correlation between that and some of these things. Okay, big deal. Anybody can mess with numbers. Well, what other evidence do you have that it's not safe beyond, things like that? Well, one, you look at how fast it was developed.
Yeah.
The average vaccine was developed in 10 to 15 years. Yeah. The fastest vaccine ever developed before the jab was 4 years. And this one was developed in less than 1 year. Now, if you go to the next slide here, you'll see a little bit of a breakdown. And it may be a little tough to see, but this is a chart from the Pfizer trials, phase 2 and 3. So this is the actual trial data that they used to, at least in part, to make a determination as to whether or not to get emergency use authorization from the FDA. Now, what this chart is showing, the bars are showing the number of deaths that occurred during the trials. And then the diagonal lines are accumulating those deaths. Right. So the dark black lines are representing the group that was vaccinated, the group that received the jab. The gray lines are showing the placebo group that did not get it. Okay. Yeah. So what you see there is that the data cutoff was November the 14th of 2020. It started in July. That means in week 17, so just after 17 weeks, they said, that's all the data we need.
Right.
So after 17 weeks, they cut off the data. Now you can see those two diagonal lines at that point in time are pretty close together, right? Yeah. So you would say, okay, well, same number of people died in the placebo groups, died in the vaccinated group. Well, then they got EUA approval a couple weeks later in week 21. Well, and the reason why that's important is once they got EUA approval, from research standard perspective, if you have a cure for something or you believe you have a cure for something, it's unethical not to offer it to your placebo group.
Right.
So in essence, at that point in time, they went to the placebo group like, who wants it?
Yeah.
And so that effectively ends your experiment, right? You no longer have a random control trial. You no longer have your control group to compare to. Right. So they ended the control group. And then what happens after the approval, you start to see those two diagonal lines start to separate, where the vaccinated deaths start going up and the other one starts leveling out. Right. Now, that's just in 20-some weeks worth of data. It ends at week 33. Yeah. So after just 33 weeks of data, that's what we have here. So the point is, how could you possibly know of any long-term health consequences after just 17 weeks of data? Yeah. It's not possible.
It's not possible.
So it wasn't long enough. So if you go to the next slide, so it's developed too fast. The next one is there's no accountability. The National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of '86, which is the one that instituted the VAERS database, and the PrEP Act of 2020, both of these have essentially given not only pharmaceutical companies, but the PrEP Act has given the government complete immunity for any damages, any wrongdoing that happens. And just to give an example of how this is affecting real people in our state, there was an article in the Carolina Journal, and the headline was, quote, "Appeals Court Rules Against Mother Who Sued Guilford Schools Over Son's Forced Vaccination Due to the PrEP Act." So what happened was this family, the son was playing football at a Guilford County school. This was back during COVID, the pandemic. They had an outbreak, and they said, "Hey, all the team needs to get tested." So the stepdad takes the son up there to get tested. He drops him off, waits outside. He goes inside, and they ask him if he's vaccinated. Well, he ends up saying, like, "Hey, I'm just here for a test." He says he didn't want to be vaccinated. Well, the nurses go and talk, and this is all in the article. One of the nurses says, "Just give it to him." So they give him the jab against his will, without his knowledge, and then when the parents find out after the fact, they go to sue for damage for injury.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, they go sue. Well, the appeals court ruled, no, you can't sue them because of the PrEP Act.
Wow.
Now, if someone can force you to take something against your will, and you have no legal recourse, what's to stop? $3,700. I mean, that's not going to deter vaccine manufacturers from making billions of dollars.
No.
So that's the big problem. It's no deterrent. If you go to the next one, it's doubted by the public. And I put this in here not because a survey proves anything, but what it does show is that this is not a fringe conspiracy theory. If someone's watching this and they're thinking, "Oh, these are just some crazy nuts who just want to have a gripe," because the latest Rasmussen Reports National Telephone and Online Survey finds that 53% of American adults, that's just all of them, 53% believe it is likely that side effects of the jab has caused a significant number of unexplained deaths.
Yeah.
I mean, that's insane. And what that tells you is that half the country's looking around going, something's not right.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know what it is, but there's only one thing that happened to everybody.
Yeah, well, and like we were talking before the show, and it's, I'm sure everybody watching online that watches this has had these same thoughts. I know, I have, I'm sure Josh has, you have. When somebody dies unexpectedly, didn't have any problems, any medical history, the first thing that comes to people's minds now is, did they have the jab? Did they take the jab? Nobody wants to ask the question because it's just kind of inappropriate to ask.
Right.
But majority of people, over half of America, that's, I believe, the first thing they go to thinking, was that what caused it?
Right.
And like you say, there's really no recourse for anybody.
Right.
$3,700. You can't put a price on quality of life. There's a lady, I think, in maybe Midland area, young girl in her late 20s, perfectly healthy, got the jab, no big deal. Took the second one. Within a few weeks, I think maybe a few days, now when you see her videos on social media, she's shaking uncontrollably, can't hardly speak. $3,700 would be maybe what she gets. How can you,
Right.
It's
and
just.
most of them won't get anything. And,
Yeah.
And that's the thing. The point of this too is, someone may say, well, Jason, why are you doing this? You're not a doctor, you're not a medical professional, whatever. You're right. The reason why I'm doing it is because medical professionals won't or don't feel like they can.
Or lose their medical license.
That's right.
Yeah.
Because they're under threat of losing their board certification, or they might lose their practice, or they might get fired from the hospital, or whatever the case may be. So even if there are some out there who actually believe what I'm telling you, they're afraid to speak out.
Yeah.
Now, we need some brave folks to do this, and there have been some.
Yeah.
The folks that Ron Johnson and other people are talking to, there's hours of testimony from some of these brave people that are being absolutely persecuted for what they're saying, but they're doing it not because they're making money off of it, but because they're trying to save people's lives.
And I forgot to write his name down. I was just watching this today on X, but one of the doctors that is the most published doctor in medical journal history,
Peter McCullough.
Peter McCullough, that was it. Mm-hmm. Because he spoke out against it. Now he's, I think, basically fighting for his license, medical license.
Yeah, he's been persecuted in different ways. There's another pathologist who had a large lab in Idaho, was well respected and all that. He lost his whole lab. I mean, he's trying to build from the ashes. You know, he's been decertified from certain states and things like that. I mean, it's unbelievable. And that's why, like, when people look at this information, they go, well, how come I can't find this if I go out on Google? It's because of the censorship.
Yeah, you can't.
If you don't know where to go, you're not going to find this information. Why?
Yeah.
And that goes back to something else I was thinking about earlier when we were talking about bears and be safe and all that. These medical professionals, the people that have spoken out, that are providing this information, one of the things that they've said is that there's something called the Vaccine Safety Data Link, which is basically the master database that the CDC and FDA partner with medical organizations across the country. They have all of the vaccine records and all of the immunization records. Everything's tied together. So it's like they've said, if they would just release the data, they could prove in a week whether everything we're saying is completely false or completely true. Well, if they won't release the data,
what are you hiding?
Going back to the cover-up. So next thing is there's a lack of manufacturing control, and this is where we start really getting into, I think, some of the at least in my mind, is the more that I see this information, some of the more convincing things. So when you look at this data, this is looking at lot numbers. So basically, there's multiple lots of a vaccine, right? It's basically, different batches is the way to think about it. So with each batch that's being made, you can see that this just one chart shows you the amount of myocarditis, and this was as reported to VAERS, the amount of myocarditis per million doses of the Pfizer jab that was given out. Now, what you would expect to see is if you had manufacturing control, it would be the exact same across every one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And look how different that first lot there you got is over almost 100 instances of myocarditis per million versus under 10 for most of these, and I'm sure it goes down from there. There's tons of these charts out there on openbears.com. But the point is that when people say things like, well, didn't bother me, I'm fine. Well, thank the Lord, you must have got a good, good lot. And the fact, too, is from a percentage perspective, most people, thank God, most people have not been harmed, at least in a way that we can see. Yeah. And we're thankful for that. Yeah. But when you give this to everybody, and you not just give it to everybody, you want to keep giving it to everybody. Yeah, continually. Then you're talking masses amount of harm and death potentially that we're looking at. So that paints a grim picture. Now you go to the next one here, and this is about. I think this will shock a lot of people. Some people will say, "Well, hey, listen. I believe the Pfizer trials. They did it right. If they say it's safe, then it's safe." Well. Here's some information that Pfizer also says that you may not know about. Even if you believe that the Pfizer trial demonstrated that the vaccine was safe, it's not the same one that the world received. Right. So the product used in the clinical trial was made via process 1. The one that went in everybody's arms was made via process 2. Now, these are quotes from an article from the Brownstone Institute. Someone did some great reporting. They got this from the Pfizer documents that by the way, they wanted to keep under seal for 75 years. Quote, in response to the switch from process 1 to process 2 to support an increased scale of manufacture, Pfizer added an amendment to its original clinical trial protocol. It promised that it would conduct a comparison study to explore the safety and immunogenicity in individuals 16 to 55 years of age vaccinated with process 1 and process 2. This protocol amendment was made on October 6, 2020. Well, what does that mean? Well, what they're saying is they're acknowledging, Pfizer acknowledged that it was a different process. Yeah. And what they said is, you know what, we'll make an amendment that we'll do that safety testing on process 2. And they made that amendment in October of 2020, so that was before it rolled out. Well, then, almost 2 years later, on September of 2022, quote, on September 15, 2022, Pfizer removed The objective to describe the safety and immunogenicity of the jab in individuals 16 to 55 years of age, vaccinated with study intervention produced by manufacturing process 1 or process 2. Because, why did they remove that? Because of the volume of the vaccine now distributed and administered globally using manufacturing process 2, making the comparison unwarranted.
Yeah.
So basically what they were saying was, well, we don't give it to everybody now.
Yeah.
So there's no point in doing any safety testing.
Yeah.
I mean, we laugh at that, but that's horrible.
Yeah,
that's
it is.
Devastating.
Yeah.
I mean, they sat there and admitted, they're like, yeah, you know what? You're right. We made this using a whole different way than the one that we tested, which, by the way, that one didn't even prove safety. Right?
Yeah.
We already talked about that. And yet they gave this one to everybody and they said, you know what? You're right. We need to go back and test that. Oh, you know what? Snap. We done given it to everybody. So
Yeah.
Oh,
so
well.
yeah, never mind.
Oh,
Moving on.
Yeah. And why can they say that? Because they have immunity.
They've got immunity. Yep.
If you go to the next one, this is they were never vaccines in the first place. And you've heard people say things like this, and the easiest explanation of that is it didn't stop you from getting it. Didn't stop you from getting sick. I mean, that's what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Didn't stop you from doing any of those things. But even more than that, quote, in BioNTech, which is the group that essentially partnered with Pfizer to make it, in BioNTech's U.S. Security and Exchange Commission filing, so this is their investment filing, it states, quote, mRNA is considered a gene therapy product by the FDA. Now, that's important. And the reason why that's important is because gene therapy products have different safety standards than traditional vaccine products.
Yeah.
So it goes on to say, quote, Pfizer-BioNTech documents, which the FDA wanted to remain hidden from the public until 2096, so the only way they got it was through lawsuits, revealed that critical safety studies relating to genotoxicity, which has to do with gene intervention, DNA, and carcinogenicity, which is basically cancer causing, were never done. And neither were they deemed necessary. Why? Because they were treating it under the guise of a conventional vaccine.
Yeah.
So what that tells you is that, you know, we can say for a fact that this is not, it was never a vaccine product. It was always a gene therapy product. And they did not conduct the proper safety trials. That's in black and white in their own documents.
Yeah, the guy that, and I watched a whole documentary on the guy that invented mRNA. I mean, he said himself that mRNA is gene therapy and was never intended to be used in a vaccination scenario. You know, and then subsequently he, you know, suicided himself, but that's neither here nor there.
Well, and they've been studying on mRNA for decades, but they had never up until this point actually produced a product to market that had passed all the safety trials. So even though, so some people say, oh, you know, mRNA wasn't new, they've been working on it a long time. Yeah, they've been working on it a long time, but they've never delivered it safely.
Yeah.
And so now all of a sudden you've got this rush job, 17 weeks, you know, one process to another. It's not even, didn't even give it the proper safety trials. And now they're like, oh, it's safe. Don't even worry about it. Just go ahead and give it to whoever.
Yeah.
So that kind of takes you to the next part, which is it was not intended for human use. This is Dr. Ryan Cole, who's a U.S. pathologist. He did his fellowship at the Mayo Clinic, was licensed in 12 states, has seen over 500,000 pathology cases in his long and distinguished career. And during his address to the UK Parliamentary Office on the harms of the shot, he shared the following statement, and you see that on the screen. In the lipid nanoparticles data sheet, it states these are not for human and not for veterinary use. These are for research purposes only, yet they went into 5 billion people around the world. Now, for those who aren't familiar with the lipid nanoparticle, this is probably the most, you know, dangerous aspect of the shot. And what the lipid nanoparticle is that it's the delivery system for the spike protein. The spike protein was essentially what's to fake your body into thinking that it's got the virus so that it could, you know, fight it. Well, the lipid nanoparticles are small enough where they can go through any cell wall and membrane in your body. They can go anywhere. They can go in your nervous system, your circulatory system, the whole thing. And that's what makes it so dangerous. What's interesting, and a lot of people don't know this, because this was, and this is not a virus. The difference is when you got the lipid nanoparticle in your system, it can go anywhere. And that's why you start, that's why people are hypothesizing that you're seeing things like all kinds of disorders, neuro disorders, circulatory disorders, cancer, right, the whole thing, blood and clotting and all of that is related to this lipid nanoparticle.
And
it's
that's,
dangerous.
I mean, the way, because I was reading some of this stuff today, and basically what it's doing with the lipid nanoparticles is it allows the spike protein, now it can go anywhere. Mm-hmm. And what it's doing is it's attaching itself more or less to your immune system in a lot of cases. So then when your body's throwing up signals going, hey, I'm not right, something's not right, it's more or less attacking itself.
Yeah, the spike protein's attaching itself to good cells.
Yeah.
And so when your body comes to attack it, it's
attacking
the good cells.
cells. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's kind of the issues that you run into. But what Dr. Cole is pointing out is that there's a data sheet for the lipid nanoparticle that instructs how it should be used,
right.
and it specifically says do not use it on humans
or veterinarian use.
Yeah, on your dog.
Yeah, don't even use it on your dog.
All right, so we go to the next part here. So there's an audio that goes with this. You can listen to this on the video that I recorded. But this is a gentleman named John Bedouin Sr. He's a retired Massachusetts systems engineer and analyst, and he's retired for a 30-year career of doing this stuff. So bottom line is he's a mathematician.
Yeah.
And like a lot of people, he got interested, wanted to dig more, find out what's going on. Well, he did a FOIA request in the state of Massachusetts, and he got access to all of their death certificate records, the whole thing. Now, you can't do that in North Carolina because we have laws against that, but in Massachusetts you could, and he said he was surprised. He said I think he made like 7 or 8 FOIA requests. He said this was the one he got.
Wow.
And he was shocked because he had his other requests, he said, were a lot simpler than that one, but this is the one he got. Well, what he did was he compared that death certificate information and aligned it to the VAERS database. So he went in and basically said, let me match up these records one to one. And of course he did that, mathematical, statistical way. But in doing so, what you will hear, this was some testimony that he gave at the New Hampshire Senate. And in his talk, you'll hear a couple things. One is that there was a dramatic shift to blood and circulatory illnesses. And of course, these are what's being reported from VAERS and matched up with death certificates. Not starting in 2020, but starting in 2021. So there he's like, okay, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Then he said, he even goes to talking about, he starts telling stories because he can match up the death certificate with the VAERS report. He can tell you what happened to the person, like what they reported. So the person will say, went to the hospital, had a headache, right. They gave me a Tylenol, sent me home, came back, right? So he tells these horrible stories of these people, and of course, no medical professional will even consider that the jab could be the cause. Right. Which is a whole other problem in this, right? And that's a result of us not being honest about what's going on.
Yeah.
So, people talk about science. Well, how is it scientific to include everything as a consideration except one thing?
Yeah.
Well, then he says that he'll tell this terrible story. It's plain as day that the person died of the jab. Yeah. And he says, and what is it reported to cause of death on a death certificate? Died from complications of the virus. Now, he said, that's a felony. Yeah. Because that's false reporting. What he's done is he's actually gone and he's filed suit with he's working with the Attorney General's office to file suit because he's saying they're falsifying records, which are federal crimes. He also says that the CDC stopped coding. So, for example, he said one of the things that CDC does is when they get death certificate records, there's cause of death on there. Well, no one sits around and reads all those causes of death. They have a system that converts those causes into codes. And that's what they sort of track in the system. Well, he said, if you go and talk to the CDC, they'll say, well, we don't have any instances of deaths being coded. Well, he said, that's because they shut the system off. He said they had some get reported in, and then they just shut that little system off, and so they don't do it anymore. Yeah. So, again, is he right about that? Is he wrong about that? I don't know. But at this point, like I say, they could just easily disprove this, right, with the right information. Next is posed by the State Surgeon General. So Dr. Joseph Ladapo, who many of you may have heard from the state of Florida, free state of Florida, a lot of great stuff going on down there. Well, they've been doing a grand jury on this for over a year now, studying all aspects. In fact, they released a preliminary report on the whole virus and how it was treated a few months ago. But he just recently came out, this was in January, and he says, quote, DNA integration poses a unique and elevated risk to human health and to the integrity of the human genome, including the risk that DNA integrated into sperm or egg gametes could be passed on to offspring of mRNA COVID-19 vaccine recipients. if the risk of DNA integration have not been assessed for the jab, these jabs are not appropriate for use in human beings. So the point he's making is going back to the part we were talking about earlier. He's basically saying these are gene therapy products, and they have to do DNA integration testing. And so he's like, unless they've done that, and of course he knows they haven't, this is not fit for human use. And so this is the state surgeon general saying this, right? This isn't just some quack on the side of the street somewhere. So that's huge. Then you go to a couple of these I can go through pretty quickly. Next one is opposed by the World Council for Health. You can see that they had, there was an expert panel of the World Council of Health found cancer-promoting DNA contamination. So we were just saying the Surgeon General was like, how do we know DNA is not being contaminated? There's a study saying, it is.
It is.
We got proof of that.
Right.
In their summary of findings, they said, quote, one of the things they said should happen is an immediate moratorium on these genetic vaccines was demanded by the expert panelists. So these are health experts. You want to hear from health experts? These are health experts. You go to the next one here, and this is the Global COVID Summit, which is made up of 17,000 physicians and medical scientists from all over the world. One of the principles that they are standing upon, and you can see that's dated May 11th of 22, we declare, and the data confirm, that the experimental genetic therapy injections must end. I mean, that was in 22 they were saying this. So the evidence has been out there for a long time. It's just that it's growing now to just this avalanche of information. And so that's why, like I say, it's important to put this together. Now you go to the next one here, and this is Dr. Peter McCullough that you were talking about. What I did was on the recording that I've got out on Rumble, I play about an 8-minute testimony. So this is his opening statement. This was a hearing that was held on January 12th of this year by Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. She hosted this hearing with special guests Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Ryan Cole, who I mentioned earlier, and Dr. Kirk Milhoan. If you listen to his opening statement, you're going to hear, first of all, you're going to hear his record, and that's he's one of the most decorated cardiologists in the country. He's spoken at almost every medical school in the country. He's been cited in over 780 peer-reviewed research papers. He's written himself. He's had published 70 peer-reviewed papers just on COVID alone. And then he's worked with the CDC and FDA on medical safety, so he knows the process and how this works. And so he even says, I never recommended these jabs to my patients. I never thought this was a good idea. And basically, I've been in every forum you can go to, and I have said unequivocally, this must end now. It is not safe. And he talks about all the research that he's found. He's like, look, he says something to the effect of, my experience is just based on on the data, right? This is what I've seen in my practice. This is what I'm seeing in the peer-reviewed literature, and it's unequivocal. He said that there is, for some people that say like, well, going back to what we were saying before, hey, you got correlation, but you don't have causation. There are peer-reviewed research papers, and of course, most of his focus has been on myocarditis, heart issues. He says there's over 3,400 peer-reviewed research papers and growing proving that myocarditis is being caused by the jab. And that's not even going into the deaths. To give you a matter of scale, like how big of a deal is this? Because some people say, well, you look at the myocarditis numbers, it's really not that big compared to billions of people getting it. He said that before the pandemic, he had seen 2 cases of myocarditis in his career, 2 in his career. Now he sees it daily. He said before there was, you would see 200 to 400 cases per year in the whole country. And now it's thousands. So it's just the numbers are off the charts. And what people don't realize is that health conditions like myocarditis, like pericarditis, et cetera, these health conditions, even if they don't kill you, they're putting people in disabled conditions for the rest of their life. There was a guy, it was a doctor I was listening to on a podcast the other day, the American Thought Leaders podcast, which is Epoch Times. They've got a great podcast. That guy's great. But he was interviewing a physician, I think in California, and they've been doing a lot of research on these health issues. And he was saying that he's got people that could run 4-minute miles, like marathoners, and now they can't go up this flight of stairs without losing their breath. That's how bad off they are. So if you go to the next slide, this just kind of brings you back to when I showed you those EMS categories before. And we've talked about things like blood and circulatory issues, neurological issues, things like that. what do you see? The increases that you're seeing, seizures, it's neurological, cardiac rhythm issues, heart issues, stroke, blood clotting, vaginal hemorrhage, blood clotting issues. So this is where you're seeing all this stuff. And so that's what's kind of raising the alarm. Finally, you go to this sort of last piece, and again, this is going to the questioning the safety, is the risk outweighs the reward. According to peer-reviewed research by Dr. McCullough and others, quote, applying reasonable conservative assumptions, the estimated harms of the mRNA shot greatly outweigh the rewards. For every life saved, there were nearly 14 times more deaths caused by the injection.
Wow.
Now, that's assuming that you believe anybody was really saved, right?
Yeah.
But that's them taking that's all based on the Pfizer trial data and saying, look, if we take what happened during the trials and then we extrapolate that forward using conservative estimates, this is the numbers that you get to. So they'll basically calculate based on the number of people that were dying at the rate they were dying. If we calculate a number that die, like how many times do you have to give it to somebody before somebody dies?
Right.
Versus how many times do you have to give it to somebody before you assume that someone was saved?
Right.
When you compare those two, that's where you get this ratio from. So it's not even close, is the point, right? That the safety, and that's the thing. If you hear all of this and you say, a lot of great data, hey, anybody can lie with numbers, right, all that stuff, what is indisputable is between what we talked about with the safety studies, the fact that it's not treated like a gene therapy product, on and on, there's more than enough evidence to prove that the proper safety trials have not been conducted.
Right.
And therefore, no one can tell you that this is safe. It's impossible.
Right. Yeah.
And then it's just on top of that, all of this other information just shows, and oh, by the way, we have an avalanche of reasons to believe that not only is it not safe, but it's actually dangerous.
Yeah.
So that kind of leads to the last part, which is why does it matter? Why are we doing all this? And we've talked some about that. But number one, they're still pushing this. So if you go to the next slide here, you'll see this is what's on the CDC's website today.
Right.
Right. And so you see, hey, everybody from birth, cradle to the grave needs it.
Yeah.
Which is insane. The fact that they're still advertising giving this to children is just, it seems criminal to me. Like I just can't believe that, because we all know, everybody knows, if you've only half paid attention to what's going on, everybody knows that there's not a risk in the world to a child of this thing.
Yeah.
And yet they're still pushing it. And then on top of that, you look at that last bullet point there. It says people who are up to date have lower risk of severe illness, hospitalization, and death from the virus than people who are unvaccinated who have not completed the doses recommended by CDC. Well, according to peer-reviewed research, quote, despite the rhetoric, no large randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trials, which is the research standard, none of those trials have ever demonstrated reductions in SARS-CoV-2 transmission, hospitalization, or death, end quote.
Right.
So if you went back, for example, people say, well, what about the Pfizer trial? I thought that in the Pfizer trial, out of 22,000 people who took it and 22,000 people who didn't take it, I think you had a total of something like, I think in that trial period, something like 20 people that maybe died in the whole thing. The point being is they were saying you didn't have enough data to prove whether or not there was the only thing they actually claimed to prove in the Pfizer trial was that it was effective of preventing people from getting the virus. That's what they were trying to say they were proving.
Yeah.
They never did any trials to prove it protects against transmission or hospitalization or death. So anytime someone tells you, which is on the regular when it comes to the health officials and the media, when they say that, it is a lie. Yeah. There is absolutely no proof of that.
Well, that's
whatsoever.
the whole other thing, and we've heard, but we're hearing more about it now. And this could go in a whole nother direction. But the whole thing about the shedding, and they've been able through reports to prove that people that are in close proximity to people that's had the mRNA jab, that those proteins, the spike proteins, it causes you to shed, and those proteins can go from one carrier into another person. So that's a whole other issue. Right. And then, like you said earlier, they pulled eye drops off with zero reports.
Yeah.
But we have all this stuff,
Right.
and it's like, just
Yeah,
nothing to
keep
see
going.
here. Just
Yeah,
keep on going.
Keep going. Yeah, and you're right. Shedding is a whole nother category, and there's all kinds of research on that front as well. And I think the main point that I remember, at least from it, is that it can be passed in bodily fluids. And so, if you think about where does that take you, well, what happens when we start talking about blood transfusions?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a serious concern because one of the things Dr. McCullough talks about in his opening statement is he says, we don't yet know how long the spike protein stays in your system.
Yeah.
He's like, there's lots of papers where they've said, hey, we looked at it for this long and it was still there.
Yeah.
We looked at it for this long and it was still there. But we don't know how long it's there because at some point their study stops. So this is one of the consequences of not having that open dialogue, the open research and all that stuff.
Yeah.
If you go to the next thing here, the next reason it matters is because there's over 30 mRNA products in development at Moderna. Like this, mRNA is considered to be the new platform for these types of it's a delivery system.
Yeah.
And so they see massive potential in this. They can produce it easily, et cetera, and probably cheaply would be my guess. But there's billions of dollars here to make. And so they can take all the things that the flu, right, all this stuff, and they're going to convert them into mRNA. So if you're thinking to yourself, well, it's all over now, nobody's really taking it anymore, what's it matter? It matters because they're just getting started.
It's just getting started.
They're just getting
exactly.
started.
Yeah.
So the only way it's going to change is we're going to have to bring a stop to it.
Yeah.
Next is the law requires informed consent. By law, you can see here, informed consent is both an ethical and legal obligation of medical practitioners in the U.S. and originates from the patient's right to direct what happens to their body. Some of the required elements for informed consent include number 2 there, which says you are required to know the risk and benefits of any procedure. Well, the problem is, again, according to peer-reviewed research, quote, due to the lack of formal and transparent assessment by regulators, which we've well laid out here, experts at the World Council of Health also noted that it is currently impossible to provide informed consent for these products as their complete risks remain undisclosed and not fully understood. I mean, if you haven't done the proper safety trials, then there's no way you can tell someone that it's safe or not safe.
Yeah.
You can't tell them anything, and therefore they can't have informed consent. The next thing is there's a Gallup survey that was out. This goes back to something we were talking about earlier about trust. Gallup asks every year, you can see this was in January of this year, please tell me how you would rate the honesty and ethical standards of people in these different fields.
Wow.
Now, you can see there up at the top, medical doctors and pharmacists are typically, they're higher rated. You can see that their percent of very high and high ratings in 2019 were in the 60s, which is, virtually higher than almost all the other ones except for nurses. And you'll see how much that's changed. They have seen the largest drop of any of these groups. Police officers have seen a huge drop. Pharmacists have seen a huge drop. Medical doctors have seen a huge drop. Even nurses, while they were so high before, they've seen a high drop as well. Well, why? Because people, they don't think they can trust them.
Yeah.
Because they know they're not getting the truth.
Yeah.
People look and they look around and they see what's going on, and maybe someone's brave enough to ask their doctor and go, what's going on with this? And oh, there ain't nothing going on. Everything's good. Go on ahead and get you another one.
I see clergy. Clergy took a big hit too, but
that's right.
There's a lot of them. They're not speaking the truth.
That's exactly right. That's right. People don't feel like they can trust anybody, and that's because people are lying to them.
Exactly.
Right? It's either lies of commission or lies of omission.
Yeah.
And people know it, and I think that's and the impacts of this are when people don't feel like they can trust their healthcare providers. It's going to make them less likely to go get the care they need.
Yeah.
So when they actually do have a problem that the doctor isn't lying to them about, how do they know?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
They're like, I don't know what to trust you on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So decline in medical trust is important. Next, and probably finally, I guess in this part is people's lives are being destroyed.
Yeah.
And this is where we talk about the value of life.
Mm-hmm.
We can talk about numbers all day long, and obviously, that matters, and it's important to build sort of the case. But behind all those numbers are people.
Yeah.
And right now, as a society, we're kind of just acting like, well, that's their problem.
Yeah.
Lucky me, I guess I just, I'm good. So what? This is a story of a lady named Christy Simmons, and she's from North Carolina. This was an article I found in one of the publications I looked through, and I wanted to find sort of a North Carolina story. And I'm sure, honestly, if given the 53% number of people who think something's up,
Yeah.
we're all probably thinking of somebody in our head right now where we go, I hate to think it, but I bet that's what happened to so-and-so.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Christy Simmons, a previously healthy 41-year-old nurse, so she wasn't old, 41-year-old nurse from Mitchell County, says she has felt abandoned by the medical system following her jab. A week after receiving the Moderna vaccine, Simmons had 16 consecutive seizures and was transported to Mission Hospital by helicopter. 16 consecutive. Nearly a year later, she says she still has intermittent seizures, periodic Bell's palsy, and chronic pain in the left side of her head that radiates down the arm, the side where she got the injection. She can no longer work or drive. Quote, I went from being completely independent to being dependent. I can't be left home alone because some of the seizures cause me to stop breathing. And if I'm home alone, I could die. My husband has gotten very good at bringing me back.
Wow.
I mean, that's incredible. That's so sad. And this is just one story.
Yeah.
The article goes on to say, after seeing dozens of doctors, Simmons says none will confirm her injuries related to the shot, or they won't even look at it. Her adverse event report to VAERS does not even mention seizures, and Simmons believes it was altered after submission. I mean, it's one thing to say, I'm not going to believe your report.
Yeah.
It's another thing to say, yeah, I'm going to go change it.
Yeah.
She also says that Mission Hospital tried to pin her reaction on a decades-old psychiatric event. Simmons' medical records show that a variety of tests at Mission Hospital, including electrocardiogram, failed to show any irregularities, and she was diagnosed with psychogenic non-epileptic seizures and conversion disorder. And her husband said, quote, they pretty much tried to say she was crazy, report her to psych, so I took her out of the hospital. And still to this day, or at least according, from this article when it was written, I don't recall the timestamp on it, but, she has not gotten any confirmation of treatment. She's going to live with this for the rest of her life.
Yeah. Well, there was, it was on the House floor, I believe it was, I believe it was a little over a year ago on some of the testimonies and things. But Bell's palsy is one of the things that has increased. The doctor testified, I don't know the exact numbers, but I know it was in the last 2 years or 3 years, Bell's palsy has increased over 3,000%.
Yeah.
And that's another one of those, okay, that's not by chance.
Right.
What causes it?
Right.
And everybody, when all these other things are going skyrocketing, there's got to be one common factor that's making it. If it was just Bell's palsy by itself, okay, we could research it. Maybe it's something they're putting in our drinks or in the water. But it's like all of this stuff's happening. There's got to be one common factor here.
Yeah, you had, thinking about her story, there's there's many other groups. If you want to hear more stories like hers or read about more stories, 2 websites I can give you. One is react19.org. So they have all kinds of video testimonies and podcasts of people sharing their story. And they're actually an activist organization. They're trying to push legislation in Congress to help get these people some compensation. They're also, so they're a nonprofit that you can donate to. But they're also being advocates for these people, just trying to get their stories out. The other one is a group called Can We Talk About It? And canwetalkaboutit.org. And, that kind of goes to what we've been saying is, they're saying the thing that we're saying, which is, why aren't we even talking about this?
Yeah.
Like, we won't even let these people tell their story without trying to squash them. There were stories of Facebook groups and all kinds of stuff that were out, a year or two ago, had tons of members, right? Tens of thousands of members. And what happened? They shut the groups down. So these folks are, not only have they been, in some cases, in these people's cases, disabled for life, but you won't even let them tell their story.
Yeah.
So finally, what does this kind of sum all this up? As I started with, something is wrong. You can go to the next slide here. We've got a couple bullets, but something's wrong. It started with the shot, I believe. I believe we've made a pretty clear case that the shot is not safe. You can go. There's a couple bullets here. You just pull them all 5 up there. More is coming, right? We talked about more mRNA is coming. And finally, the truth and the life matter. People deserve informed consent. They deserve to know the truth.
Yeah.
And for the sake of life that we as Christians value so much, that's why we have to speak out. That's why we have to fight this. That's why we have to reform the medical system. Our medical system is broken.
Mm-hmm.
And the last several years have proved that beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
When you have this kind of thing going on, and you had that many people lying or doing nothing, I mean, when in our history have we ever treated an illness by saying, stay at home till you can't breathe and then go to the emergency room? That's no one believes that's medicine.
Yeah.
And yet we all just sat along and this is what we did.
Yeah.
So I'll just end it with, and I guess it goes to, and this kind of goes to what you can do. So if someone's out there, and especially if you are someone who believes they may have been injured by this, or you're concerned that you might have issues down the road, or maybe there's someone you love that you think may need some information, I want to provide at least 2 resources that you can consult, because there are some people out there doing some great work. They are trying to help people. There is hope to kind of help people recover and kind of get that spike protein out of the body, right? That's kind of what we're doing here. One of them is called COVID-19criticalcare.com. So that's COVID-19criticalcare.com. You can go there. That's the FLCCC. They put out a lot of information about treating the virus back during the day. They have a post injury treatment called I Recover, and they encourage you to go consult with your doctor. They give you all the information. You take it to your doctor. If your doctor won't talk about it, they can actually link you up with doctors. They'll provide you with information. You can find somebody. The other resource I give you is twc.health. So that's T as in Tom, W, C as in cat, .health. That's the wellness company. The wellness company is Dr. Peter McCullough's organization that he started. They have a whole system, right? Well, they'll take you in, they'll run some tests, right? They'll do all that stuff. They'll put you on a program. He's got a formula that involves nattokinase, which some folks may have heard of for whatever reason. And these are natural supplements, by the way. But they've noticed that something like nattokinase supposedly binds to the spike protein, kind of helps flush it out of your system. I don't know all the details of all that, but again, those are just 2 resources that people can look into that, if you're looking for some information or some help, there's a way to get that. But more importantly, and the reason why I did all this, and certainly this is part of it, is just so people can get informed. And hey, if you've done it before, you don't have to do it anymore, right? That's one. But then number 2 is, we've got to push for change. And so I went to our local health board to share this information, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with it. They'll have their meeting next month, and I'm hopeful that they'll take action. I've asked them to take some specific action. And then from there, we'll try to go to the next step. I'd love to be able to get some of the state legislature involved, and that's been a really tough hill to climb. But the thing that people need to realize is that all the systems that were in place that enabled this to happen to us in the first place are all still in place. So, we can put our head in the sand and we can pretend like this will never happen again. If you haven't heard, the treaty with the World Health Organization is coming up in May. For people who aren't aware of that, that would essentially give up all of our sovereignty when it comes to health emergencies, as deemed by the World Health Organization, which means they could essentially call climate change a health emergency and supposedly tell us all what to do. So bottom line is, hey, I just really appreciate you allowing me to share this information. Like I say, for those who, if you want to hear some of the audio clips that I had, it's on the full version on the Rumble video out there, and maybe you can link that or something. But otherwise, like I say, just, if you got a story, tell your story.
And we do appreciate that. I know this, that the research you've done, that wasn't done in just a few hours.
No.
That's a lot of research. But at the same time, we're going to put the link to your Rumble. We'll try to get that in the comments or in the description on the post. We'll get those other links for information and some videos, and for anybody that's watching that may have had it. I watched a little bit of Peter McCullough's where he was talking about using different types of stuff they've seen, that it's not a cure-all, but it's moving in the right direction. And some of them consist of mixing those things with the hydroxy, and some of them ivermectin, and some different, for people. He was listing all this stuff. I'm like, wow. So we're moving it in the right direction. So, the more people know, like I say, the more informed we are, then we realize, okay, we do have options.
Right.
We're not just, I'm stuck with this. What do I do?
Right.
But, we do appreciate you taking the time to do this. And guys, we really need your help more than ever with sharing this. Like this video. Let us know that you liked it. Even if, I say this all the time, but if you didn't like it, you can put a thumbs down. We're just trying to give you the research that Jason has found, some things I've researched. We're just giving you what we've found. And, then take that and share this all over your social media as much as possible. We do stand a chance of being censored. This video could stand a chance of being taken down. We've been hit before. This is not our first rodeo. But, so that's why it's important for you guys to get it out as fast as possible, so that as many people can see it as possible. So they too, every one of us probably right now, knows somebody that is suffering from some kind of side effect, and nobody, really wants to point fingers at it, but we all probably know what it is. And if you could get this video into their hands and give, some of these people a little bit of hope, and that's all we have is hope, and most of all, we have hope in Jesus. And, I believe that God has given these doctors that's putting their lives and careers on the line, he's given them the wisdom to create these things, that are all, like we said, natural, but it'll help get rid of these spike proteins in our bodies. But for those that have taken it, and the biggest thing, too, is the Bible says that God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, of love, and of a sound mind. Anytime our government, our health care, our education, anytime they try to roll out new things and you don't agree with it, God says he give us a sound mind. You go to prayer with it. God will direct you through the Holy Spirit on what steps you need to take. Never make a decision based off of fear. Never make any kind of medical choice based off of fear. Make sure that you've got your information, and most of all, you're trusting the leading of God and his Holy Spirit, and he'll never lead you astray. But guys, we went a little bit long, but thank you again for tuning in. We had a great crowd tonight. Just remember, get this stuff all over social media, and write in the comments just a little something about how informative this is, to get people to click on this link and watch this. You never know, you could save somebody's life or restore hope to a family that's struggling through what has happened to them with the jab. But guys, again, we appreciate it. We love each and every one of you. Thank you so much for your support, and we'll see you again next Wednesday night. God bless.